On the morning of his wedding, Elias Rowe reread a single sentence in his prenuptial agreement and felt something unfamiliar. Not doubt, not fear, a thought of being studied. The estate was already alive with movement. Florists adjusting ivory arrangements. Staff moving discreetly across polished stone floors. Sunlight filtering through tall glass panels overlooking the ocean. Everything was precise. Everything was intentional, including her. Ruby Vance did not rush into marriage. And she certainly did not rush into marrying a billionaire. Elias stood in his private study, jacket unbuttoned, cufflinks resting beside a leather-bound folder. The prenup. He hadn't opened it in months. He didn't need to. It was standard, protective, fair. His attorneys had drafted it. Her attorneys had reviewed it. Minor adjustments had been made, except one. Clause 12G, inserted at Ruby's request. At the time, he had admired her for it. She hadn't argued for more money. She hadn't asked for ownership percentages. She hadn't negotiated lifestyle guarantees. Instead, she had requested something almost abstract. Contingency authority provision. He reread the language. In the event of executive incapacitation, compromise judgment due to investigation, public instability, or material risk exposure, temporary strategic authority over designated holdings may transfer to spouse for stabilization purposes. He had laughed the first time he saw it. Planning for my downfall? He had asked lightly. Ruby had smiled slow, steady. No, she said. Planning for unpredictability. He had signed it because he trusted her, because he loved her, because he assumed he would never need it. Now, hours before promising forever, he stared at the sentence again. Executive incapacitation, compromised judgment, stabilization purposes. Why did that sound less symbolic now? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. 5 minutes. His best man called through the door, slightly opened it to see the groom's face. Elias closed the folder. He told himself the same thing he always told himself. Control is clarity. He had built his life on that principle. He had grown up without inheritance, without safety nets, without anyone catching his mistakes. He built solar infrastructure projects across 3 continents before he turned 35. He knew how to calculate risk. He did not need contingency from anyone, especially not from the woman he was about to marry. And yet, he slipped the folder back into the drawer more carefully than before. Ruby stood in a quiet wing of the estate, her gown cascading in smooth satin lines. No dramatic sparkle, no excessive display. Elegant, grounded, certain. Her reflection did not look nervous. It looked aware. Her maid of honor watched her closely. "You're not worried about the prenup thing?" she asked gently. Ruby adjusted her earrings. "No. You basically gave yourself emergency power over a billionaire." Ruby's lips curved faintly. "He gave it to me. That's not the same thing." Ruby turned. "It is if he trusts me." And she knew he did. What he didn't know was why she had insisted. They met 2 years ago at a private leadership retreat in the Swiss Alps. No press, no cameras, just founders, architects, policy advisors. Ruby had been there to present a behavioral risk model, how high-performing executives collapse under sustained invisible pressure. Elias had listened carefully from his position, arms crossed, expression neutral. She had presented calmly, not dramatic, not accusatory, just data. "Power doesn't corrupt," she had said evenly. "It isolates, and isolation distorts judgment." Afterward, he approached her. "You think I'm isolated?" he asked. "I think you're disciplined," she replied. "But discipline without interruption becomes rigidity." He had almost smiled. She wasn't impressed by him. That intrigued him. Their relationship unfolded slowly. No flashy headlines. No social media display. She kept her consultancy quiet. He kept his empire expanding. But she noticed something. When deals tightened, he became sharper. When pressure mounted, he slept less. When questioned, he doubled down. He never exploded. He never yelled. He simply tightened. like a structure reinforcing itself until the pressure cracked it from within. That's when she requested the clause. Not because she doubted him, because she understood him. The ceremony began beneath open sky, oceans stretching endlessly behind them, guests seated in muted elegance. Elias stood steady as Ruby walked toward him. For the first time that day, he wasn't thinking about clauses or contracts. He was thinking about her eyes. Clear, unwavering, not dependent, choosing. That mattered more than love. She wasn't marrying his empire. She was marrying the man inside it. Their vows were simple. No theatrical promises. No exaggerated declarations. I choose you, he said, not because you need me, not because I complete you, but because you challenge me. Her eyes softened. I choose you, she replied, not because you are powerful, but because you are capable of growth. Most people didn't catch that word. Growth. Elias did. And for a fraction of a second, he felt that thing again. Studied. Not controlled. Not manipulated. Understood. The reception was effortless. Laughter. Music. Soft candlelight. At some point, as they stood slightly apart from the crowd, he leaned closer. You're very calm, he murmured. So are you. I always am. She tilted her head. That's not true. He looked at her. Are you predicting something? No. She brushed an invisible crease from his lapel. I'm preparing for life. He chuckled lightly. You make it sound like war. Marriage isn't war, she said gently. It's partnership under pressure. He studied her face. You think I'll break under pressure? I think you'll carry too much alone. That answer lingered between them. Not confrontational. Not dramatic. Just honest. Later that night, after guests had left and the estate quieted, they stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean. Wind gentle. Moonlight soft. You've been thinking about that clause, she said quietly. He didn't ask how she knew. Yes. Regret. No. He turned toward her. Why that specific language? She held his gaze. Because the only thing more dangerous than external threat is internal certainty. He exhaled slowly. You don't trust my certainty? I trust your heart, she replied. I don't trust what pressure does to brilliant men. That was not accusation. It was observation. He stepped closer. You think I won't ask for help. I think you won't realize you need it. Silence wrapped around them. He could dismiss it, laugh it off, turn it into charm. Instead, he did something unfamiliar. He let it sit. Then if that day comes, he said quietly, you'll step in. She didn't hesitate. Yes. Not triumph. Not ambition. Just steadiness. He nodded once, satisfied, certain that day would never come. What Elias Rowe did not know was that the instability Ruby had prepared for was already moving quietly beneath his empire. And when it surfaced, the clause he barely read would become the only thing standing between preservation and collapse. 3 weeks into their marriage, nothing had changed. And that was the problem. Elias still woke before sunrise, still trained alone in the private gym overlooking the cliffs, still reviewed global project dashboards before breakfast, still carried pressure like it was oxygen. Ruby noticed, not because he complained, because he didn't. The first crack wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, and it started with a call he took outside. They were hosting a small dinner at their coastal estate. Not investors, not press. Just friends. Architects. Writers. 2 climate researchers. 1 documentary filmmaker. Ruby believed in rooms that weren't transactional. Elias tolerated them because she believed in them. Halfway through dessert, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He stood. Excuse me. Ruby watched him step out toward the terrace. His posture didn't change, but something about the stillness did. 5 minutes passed, then 8. When he returned, he smiled easily. Sorry. Minor issue in Morocco. She nodded. What kind of minor? Regulatory delay. His tone was flat. Clean. Controlled. Too clean. Ruby didn't press, but she filed it. Later that night, when the house had emptied and the ocean wind filled the balcony again, she spoke gently. "You didn't look irritated," she said. "I wasn't. You looked alert." He loosened his collar slightly. "You analyze everything, don't you?" "Yes." He smiled faintly. "It's a temporary permit delay." "Temporary?" she repeated. "Yes." She stepped closer, studying him. "Then why didn't you tell me before dinner?" That landed. Not accusatory, just precise. He met her gaze. "Because I didn't want to redirect the room." "Or," she said softly, "you didn't want to redirect yourself." Silence. He didn't like that she saw that, but he loved that she could. "It's handled," he said calmly. She didn't argue, but she felt it. The shift. The tightening. 2 days later, the article appeared. Small publication. Industry-focused. Not viral. Yet. Row Energy Solar Corridor Faces Permit Reassessment in North Africa. Language neutral, but the subtext sharp. Reassessment meant delay. Delay meant capital freeze. Capital freeze meant scrutiny. Elias read it in his office. Didn't flinch. Didn't call PR. Didn't call legal. He recalculated internally and decided something quietly. He would fast-track a secondary expansion in South America to offset perception. Aggressive. High capital burn. High visibility. He didn't tell Ruby. She found out accidentally. Not through gossip. Not through press. Through his calendar. She wasn't snooping. They shared scheduling access to coordinate travel. And she noticed a pattern. 3 red-tagged project accelerations. Back-to-back. Unusually tight timelines. She closed her laptop slowly. He wasn't stabilizing. He was compensating. That evening, she waited until they were alone in the library. No tension. No confrontation. Just amber light and quiet air. "You're pushing South America early," she said casually. He didn't look up from the document in his hand. "It's efficient timing. It's reactive timing." His jaw shifted slightly. "I prefer proactive." She walked around the desk, leaning against the edge. "You don't counter uncertainty with speed," she said gently. "You counter it with clarity." He stood then, not angry, but upright. "I am clear." She held his gaze. "No, you're proving." That word. Proving. He exhaled slowly. "You think I'm panicking. I think you're tightening." He looked at her like she had stepped too close to something private. "You don't understand the optics," he said. "Maybe not," she replied softly. "But I understand you." Silence thickened. He didn't yell. He didn't dismiss her. He did something worse. He withdrew internally. Not physically. Emotionally. Just a fraction. But she felt it. 3 nights later, the Morocco permit was officially suspended pending environmental review. Temporary, but public. Investors didn't panic. They watched. That was more dangerous. Elias called emergency advisors. Not a board meeting. Private calls. Strategic realignments. He worked past midnight. Ruby stayed awake upstairs. Not to monitor, to sense. At 1:17 a.m., she walked downstairs quietly. He was alone in the study, screen glowing against sharp cheekbones. He didn't notice her at first. His expression wasn't afraid. It was rigid, locked. She stepped closer. "You're not sleeping." "Later. You've said that 3 nights in a row." He didn't respond. She walked around the desk slowly. "Look at me." He did, reluctantly. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said. "I'm not alone. You're isolating." His voice cooled slightly. "I am handling it." She studied him carefully. "You're accelerating 3 global projects to mask 1 delay. That's strategy. That's ego under pressure." The words landed. Not explosive, but sharp. He straightened. Careful. There it was. The edge. Not cruel, but defensive. She didn't flinch. "You think this is about the permit," she said quietly. "It's not." "What is it about then?" She held his gaze. "It's about the narrative of invincibility." Silence. "You built your identity on control," she continued, "and control feels threatened." He looked at her like she had stepped into restricted territory. "You're overanalyzing." She stepped closer. "No, I'm protecting." That word changed the air. "From what?" he asked. "From the moment you confuse momentum with stability." He laughed lightly, but it wasn't humor. "You think I'm spiraling. I think you're human." He turned away. That hurt more than anger would have. The next morning, without telling her, Elias signed authorization to secure bridge financing for the South America expansion. Large, bold, visible. The kind of move markets respected. The kind of move that either stabilized narrative or exposed vulnerability. He told himself he was regaining rhythm. He told himself speed would drown doubt. He told himself Ruby was simply being cautious. What he didn't realize was that the clause she had written was not designed for collapse. It was designed for moments exactly like this. Moments where he would never admit he was slipping. That afternoon, Ruby received a call from an independent analyst she trusted. Not gossip, not scandal, just pattern recognition. "Elias is over-leveraging," the analyst said quietly. "Temporarily. Temporarily becomes structural if market confidence wavers." Ruby closed her eyes briefly. "Is it visible?" "Not yet. Not yet." She looked at the ocean beyond the window. He wasn't reckless. He was compensating. And compensation under pressure is the first form of compromised judgment. She didn't panic. She didn't confront. She did something far more dangerous. She prepared. That night, when Elias finally joined her in the bedroom, exhaustion barely concealed, she spoke softly. "If the markets misinterpret acceleration as instability, they won't. If they do," he looked at her, "they won't." "You're certain?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, then asked the question he didn't expect. "And if your certainty is the only thing that's wrong?" Silence. He stared at her. Not angry, not shaken, just unsettled. And for the first time since their wedding, he realized something small. He wasn't irritated by her intelligence. He was afraid she might be right. By the end of that week, South America expansion headlines hit global media. Bold, ambitious, visionary. And beneath the praise, a whisper began. Overextension. It wasn't loud, yet, but Ruby heard it forming before he did. And when the market dipped 2%, just 2, she opened the prenup drawer for the first time since the wedding. Not to activate it. Not yet. Just to reread Clause 12G. Because stabilization does not begin when collapse happens. It begins when denial does. The market didn't crash. That would have been cleaner. It hovered, uncertain, like a question nobody wanted to ask out loud. South America expansion moved fast. Too fast for comfort, but just stable enough to avoid panic. Morocco remained under review. The press used words like ambitious, but analysts used quieter words. Leveraged, compressed, exposed. Elias didn't panic. He recalculated. Again. But this time, he made one decision he didn't tell Ruby about. At 2:14 a.m., while she slept upstairs, he authorized personal equity as collateral against the bridge financing. Not company equity. His high risk, high trust, high pressure. If the expansion succeeded, he would look decisive. If it stumbled, it would cost him control. He told himself it was leadership. He didn't tell her because he didn't want to worry her. He didn't tell her because he wanted to fix it alone. He didn't tell her because he believed love meant protection through silence. And that belief was exactly why she wrote Clause 12G. 2 days later, Ruby found out. Not through rumor, not through media, through a notification from their private family office. She stared at the document. Personal collateralization authorization. Executed. Her name wasn't required for approval, but it was required for notification. That was the clause. Joint disclosure of personal risk exposure exceeding a specified threshold. He hadn't told her. He had legally informed her. But emotionally, he had excluded her. That difference mattered. That evening, she didn't confront him immediately. She waited. He came home late, tired but composed. "You're quiet," he said. placing his watch on the dresser. She looked at him steadily. You used personal equity. He paused. Just slightly. Yes. And you didn't tell me. I informed you. You notified me. Silence. He stepped closer. It's calculated. You're exposed. It's controlled. Elias. His name landed softer than accusation. Why didn't you sit down with me first? He inhaled slowly. I didn't want you to worry. She held his gaze. I didn't marry you to be shielded from reality. That hit deeper than anger would have. You think I don't trust you? He asked. I think you trust yourself more. He didn't deny it, because it was true. She walked toward the window, looking out over the water. When I wrote Clause 12G, she said quietly, it wasn't about protecting myself from you. He frowned slightly. Then what was it about? Protecting us from isolation. He studied her carefully. You accelerate when pressured, she continued. You tighten. You assume responsibility. You overperform. That's leadership. That's survival. Silence. She turned back to him. And survival habits don't disappear just because you're loved. That broke something open. Not dramatically, but internally. He looked at her differently. Less defensive. More aware. You think I'm reverting, he said. I think you're scared. The word didn't insult him. It exposed him. He sat down slowly. When you built your life alone, she said gently, risk felt like something you absorbed personally. He didn't interrupt. You're not alone anymore. There it was. Not emotional. Not fragile. Just truth. The next morning, something happened he did not expect. Clause 12G activated. Not through divorce. Not through punishment. Through structure. Ruby scheduled a private advisory review under the clause's authority. Not to override him. To co-sign any future personal leverage decisions. Temporary. Protective. Legal. Strategic. He read the notice twice. It didn't strip his power. He shared it. For 90 days. The clause didn't take from him. It required alignment. He stared at the document longer than he wanted to admit. Then he did something he had never done before. He didn't resist it. That evening, he came home earlier than usual. Ruby was in the garden courtyard, barefoot on stone, reviewing documents. He walked toward her slowly. You triggered it, he said. Yes. You don't trust me. She looked up. I trust you when you're balanced. And when I'm not, I step in. He studied her expression. No smugness. No control. No dominance. Just steadiness. He exhaled. I should have told you. Yes. I didn't want to look uncertain. You don't look uncertain to me, she said softly. You look human. He was beside her. For the first time in weeks, his posture wasn't rigid. It was tired. Real. I've never shared leverage before, he admitted. I know. It feels like weakness. It's not. She reached for his hand. It's partnership. The word settled into him differently this time. Partnership wasn't softness. It was shared weight. 3 weeks later, Morocco's permit cleared. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just approved. South America stabilized gradually. The market regained confidence not because of speed, because of transparency. Analysts shifted tone. Measured leadership. Disciplined growth. Strong internal governance. He knew why. Not PR. Not timing. Alignment. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon gold, Elias turned to her. You didn't write that clause because you doubted me. No. You wrote it because you knew I would try to carry everything alone. Yes. He watched the wind move through her hair. You saw that before I did. I loved you before you were stable. That line stayed with him. She didn't fall in love with perfection. She fell in love with potential. That difference humbled him more than any market dip. Months later, at a private retreat far from press and investors, an interviewer asked them something unexpected. What is the strongest asset in your marriage? Elias answered without hesitation. Correction. Ruby smiled slightly. Trust, she added. The interviewer leaned forward. You corrected him publicly? She shook her head. I corrected him privately. Elias looked at her. And she wrote it into our foundation. The interviewer laughed lightly. That sounds strategic. It is, Ruby replied. Love should be. That night, back in their suite overlooking open water, Elias handed her something. Not jewelry, not a contract, a document, revised. Clause 12G expanded. Not temporary, permanent joint strategic review on any personal exposure exceeding threshold. She read it slowly. You're extending it, she said. Yes. You don't have to. I want to. Silence. Then he added, I don't want to be invincible. She looked up. What do you want? He held her gaze steadily. Aligned. The word felt different now. Earned. She stepped closer, with foreheads resting lightly together, breathing steady, calm. But here's what nobody knew. In the quiet background of stabilization, in the subtle shift of leadership, in the new transparency structure, another pattern had begun forming. Not against them, around them. A quiet investor group had noticed the structural changes in Rho Energy's governance. They were watching, not to challenge, to test. Because strong partnerships attract attention. And sometimes, alignment makes you a target.